Oh. Hi, guys. I'm back. Today, we're going to talk about something that is near and dear to my heart, the birthing experience in America. As we know, for Black women tends to be a little bit different. And I want to shed some light on some people's stories by telling you some of the things that have happened. So today, I am talking to Catrina Jackson. Welcome, Catrina.
Hi.
Hello, and Catrina's going to tell us a little bit about herself, and then we're going to talk about her story. So, Catrina, can you introduce yourself to everybody, and then, tell us a little bit about you?
Of course. Thank you. My name is Catrina Jackson, and what to tell about myself? I'm a mom of three. Praise the Lord. Been married 8 years this year. Really excited about to celebrate our anniversary. And I am a homemaker and homeschooler and a woman of God. Amen. I love the Lord. And I am with my daughter today. She decided to crash the party. This is Madison. And hopefully she'll cooperate through the rest of this live. But I'm excited to tell my story and bring more awareness to the issue of Black women in healthcare and getting our needs met appropriately.
Absolutely. Now, Catrina, you have had 3 different birthing experiences. So your first experience, that was pretty good, right? The first one was okay.
It was standard. it went as to be expected. And it was with the same practice as the second, and my third was here in Virginia. The first 2 were in North Carolina at Women's Hospital.
Okay. So what made this second experience a little bit different? So kind of let's transition into telling your story. What happened?
Okay. So this second experience, my baby was breech. He was Franklin breech, so he was butt down. And we tried to do the ECV to get him to turn, and that was not successful because he was lodged pretty good against my rib cage. And so when I was scheduled to have a cesarean because I was diagnosed type 2 diabetic in 2012. This was 2015. And I had basically Irish twins. My first birth was natural or vaginal. And then the second one, I had to have a cesarean because I could not present for vaginal with a Franklin breech baby. So this experience, the doctor, I went into labor on my own. And so while I was scheduled, it ended up being kind of an emergency cesarean because I started the labor process ahead of that scheduled time. When we got to the hospital, my contractions were very strong. The doctor made the comment, well, she's acting like she's in labor. And I was like, acting? Okay. Whatever that's supposed to mean, man who's never given birth, but okay. So I'm already feeling a little bit leery about him as a physician who's going to be doing my surgery anyway, but I digress. We went on, my water broke, so I said, am I in labor now? And we get to my surgery. The surgery was apparently a success because I had a healthy child with minimal, I say minimal injury, meaning he was actually cut with a scalpel on his hip a little bit during the opening process, and but it was barely a surface scratch, so I didn't cut up. My husband didn't cut up. We understood that there was a possibility. They explained the risks. But what was the greater injury, when I got to the recovery room at Women's, they required that you had to be able to move your legs before you could leave the recovery room. So I'm sorry, I'm gonna just get my family. Can you hear them? I'm trying to make sure we're not interrupted. All right. So I'm sorry about that. So we get to the recovery room and the nurse is mashing on my stomach to get the uterus down as you're supposed to make sure that it's shrinking. And I thought she was mashing kind of hard, so I said, ma'am, please, if you could just be a little bit more gentle. I feel like my staple's going to pop as hard as you're mashing. And she said, well, I got to make sure it's going down. And I said, okay. So I noticed that there was a small bruise on my abdomen when I think it was the day I was getting discharged. And I thought, well, they've been checking me. They've seen me. If there was some concern, they had to put the tape and wrote staples on my stomach. That if there was a concern, they would say something.
Mm-hmm.
And with between medication and being fatigued, the aftermath of being postpartum, I didn't think to say something. When I got home, though, that second day at home, I noticed that it was bigger. It was kind of purple. And I thought, well, this is this normal? Do you bruise like this after a cesarean? I had no expectation. I refused to go look online because I was terrified of the needle, everything about the process. I didn't want to know. And then Google can be unreliable, obviously, as a medical consult. So I didn't want to do that and mess my head up. So I called the nurse. I called the doctor's office for my OB, and she said, I have a bruise on my abdomen. Is that normal after a cesarean? And she had an attitude and was smirky with me like, of course you're going to bruise. And I thought, I said, well, I wasn't sure. I've never had a cesarean. So I'm calling to make sure the attitude's not necessary. I addressed it then. And she tried to clean it up. And I was just like, okay, thank you. So I had my 6-week appointment. I mean, it continued to be purple in the area of that it started out probably about that big, and it spread to almost my whole the entire middle section of my abdomen.
Wow.
And I went to my 6-week appointment. He took my staples out. The bruise at that point had started to turn it was just a dark spot on my abdomen. It wasn't purple anymore, but it was just like my skin had discolored. And I just assumed this was part of my birth experience. I didn't have a reason to question because the nurse, like I said, she told me bruising was normal. I didn't even ask at the doctor because he's looking at my abdomen as he takes out these staples. So I'm assuming I'm okay and that this is just a normal occurrence, or it was just an occurrence for myself. And it wasn't until I had my daughter by cesarean delivery again last year that I was waiting for this bruise to show up. I was waiting for this purpling, this discoloring to happen, and it never did. And I thought, well, now let me backtrack again. My normal OB that I saw at the practice, she didn't deliver either of them, but she did do my annual exam when I went back after that year, and I still had a small discoloration on my stomach. And she said, I'm not going to charge you for this visit. This was probably a hematoma. And I said, a hema what? Because I showed her the pictures, because I have pictures because I took pictures because I thought, this is just weird. But then I thought, I'm going to show my child these pictures if he gives me attitude when I get, he gets older or whatever. Like, this is what I went through for you. And so I had pictures of it, and she looked very concerned. And she said a hematoma, meaning I was possibly hemorrhaging. And she said, well, yes, but it's looks like, your body just reabsorbed the blood and the fluid rather than the worst outcome that could have been. And I was in my mind, I was like, so I could have bled? Like, the reality of it did not hit me at that time. The true reality of it didn't hit me until this second birth experience that, oh my goodness, that really was not normal. It should have been checked and verified that it was actually nothing. When I called that nurse, at minimum, she should have just said, schedule an appointment. I just had a cesarean. I was a diabetic patient, high risk pregnancy. At the very minimum, it should have been just come back in and let's check you out and make sure it's okay. Not absolute and blatant disregard for my welfare. Having just had a cesarean delivery and within the 6-week postpartum period where most of the danger occurs.
Yes.
So that's what happened.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah,
So you essentially were sent home with internal bleeding
correct.
during this time in which things are so critical. And now we know that Black women are dying at 4 times the rate, and it usually happens right after they've given birth. So, a lot of people think, well, how could this happen? And your story is a prime example of how you got sent home because they
Yep.
had seen you in the
Yes,
hospital
right.
and they saw that this bruise was there, but nobody thought to check.
Nobody said a word, Dr. Bizel. I mean, not a word. And that is what blows my mind now. I experienced some spinal leaking with this second cesarean with my daughter. And I complained, I was able to hold my head up hardly at all. The pain was intense, excruciating. Um, and as soon as I said it, they got the anesthesiologist right up to my room to talk to me about it and explain what it was and what the follow-up treatments were, our options were, either to plug it or to just let it pass. I chose to let it pass because I did not want my spine reinserted with that needle, to patch
Mhm.
it with the blood. And so my point being is, it was, and sometimes I discussed this with you previously, I thought that it was, it can't be insurance, because typically when you have good insurance, which I did, I had United Healthcare, PPO, and
Mhm.
so I was treated very well for both pregnancies and deliveries for the most part. But it blew my mind that there was an obvious bruising on my abdomen. The nurse had to see it to tape my stomach
Mhm.
with the staple little honeycomb that they use over the
Mhm.
staples so that you don't get them wet within the first few days.
Right.
She had to see it. The doctor, when they came back to check me, had to see it. The nurse who actually was pressing on there were several, you're on a rotation in the hospital. I was there for
Mhm.
3 days. All of these women, and I hate to throw color in there, none of them were nurses of color, but all of these women and these doctors, it was a male physician who did my surgery. Nobody said anything, not one word about that bruise on my abdomen, which is clear indication. And you don't even need a medical degree to know something had to be wrong. But
Mhm.
because, I think I assume my own strength, meaning we're expected to be strong and able to take it. And that's, a whole other topic, right, of this same problem, where Black women are supposed to be strong enough to handle it. And I just
Mhm.
said, okay, well, I'm okay. I had pain, but this is normal because I just had a cesarean. Of course I'm going to hurt. And I didn't question it again. And so my loud and clear message now is, you question everything. If it doesn't feel right, say something, demand an audience, to get appropriate care. In hindsight, but I believe my story is going to help somebody in the future, who possibly may have these same symptoms, and be able to say, no, this is not right. Check
Mhm.
this, like see it Serena Williams had to
Right.
do when she was in the hospital.
Right. And I'm glad that you brought that up because a lot of times we like to think, oh, but if you have money, if you have good insurance, if you're well educated, all
Right.
of these things will help you somehow. But as we've seen, there are people who are very, very rich who have, lots of education. There was even a story of a young lady who had a PhD in public health and she still passed away because nobody listened to what she was
Wow.
saying after she gave
Wow.
birth. And she kept going back and forth to the hospital for like a couple weeks after she had given birth to her baby. And nobody listened to her until she just passed out on the floor and it was too late. So,
Wow.
this is what is happening to us in the hospital. You said even when you walked in, you told the doctor, I'm in labor. And he said, she's acting like she's
Mm-hmm.
in labor.
Mm-hmm. Because they couldn't read the contractions, registered very low on
Mhm,
the whatever the monitor is that they check them by.
mhm,
But I just thought about something else with this second experience. I actually did have it seemed excessive bleeding afterward when I was home.
Mm-hmm.
And my swelling was, oh my goodness, I'm a big girl, but my legs looked like they belonged to somebody else. They were huge, and my feet, it was painful. I could not barely walk for how much swelling I had. And I called, and from my first experience, I was like, no, we're not going to dismiss anything. I called and I called, and they had me come back, let's recheck you. And at this practice, my care was by mostly Hispanic women. But I feel like they at least listened to me to say something doesn't feel right. I should not be going through 3 pads within an hour. Please recheck me. And, my husband rushed me back up there, and I was okay. Thank God. But at least they listened this time and attended to the complaints that I did have, including the swelling, to give me a fluid pill to reduce that swelling. But the difference between the attention I got in that first experience to this one, literally night and day.
Wow. And that's crazy that you brought that up. And I know, people like to say, oh, we're playing the race card and all of these things. But when we're talking about care and, Black women or women of color, we kind of need to have physicians and, care providers that look like us almost, because like you said, all these people, they saw you the first time. You voiced what was happening. You told them how you felt, and nobody listened to you. Whereas when you were at a practice with women of color and you had a complaint, they said, okay, come right back in. And you and I have talked about this before. A lot of this goes back to slavery and how they kind of look at us like, oh, you can endure more pain, or, this is not a real concern because Black women somehow have the ability to be stronger and to endure all of these things. But that's what's killing us, because you hear me saying to you, there's a large purple bruise on my stomach. Even if there was a tiny one, somebody should have taken the time to just say, okay, you know what? I'm just going to look at it. But no one did.
No one. And it hit me a lot of different ways. Because one, I thought, thank you, Lord, you did not let me die. And then I thought, well, if they thought that the bruising, even if they thought the bruise was around my incision, it should have definitely been a large concern considering the circumstance of having just had a cesarean delivery, where you have the possibility of bruising. I did look that up, was possibly normal, but still an indicator that there may be internal bleeding from the incision site. So even if that's what you thought it was, you were doubly at fault if anything had happened to me. And unfortunately, with women's, you have to sign a disclaimer before you even go back that they're not liable for anything that happens to you. So even if I, raising the alarm wouldn't have accomplished anything, and it's not like you're even in it. It's not about money. You're not trying to sue or because that wouldn't have saved my life. It wouldn't have brought me back if I had passed away because of their negligence. But the point is that negligence is not okay. And I went to the website for that practice, and the same doctor that delivered my child through that cesarean did the same thing for another woman. I'm not sure if she's a woman of color, but she experienced the same hemorrhaging. But in her case, she had to have 2 blood transfusions.
Wow. Wow. That's crazy. That is crazy. To know that this person is still out there performing
and still practicing.
And still practicing. Yes. And this is why I think it's so important that we share our stories. And one of the reasons why I've been so vocal about telling my story and wanting to share other people's experiences is because if we don't start sounding the alarm, and if we don't say anything and we remain quiet like we're told to continue to be, then these providers are still out there. They're still going to keep on practicing. And what happens when, that woman was able to get a blood transfusion? What happens if maybe I have Medicaid and, y'all want to treat me differently? Or maybe, just I happen to wait too long to ask for some kind of help. And then I pass out, in the middle of the floor, and I'm home with 3 children who can't do anything for me.
Exactly.
So, there are so many reasons why we have to speak up and speak out. And I appreciate you and I applaud you for sharing your story. And like you said, women's does make people sign those disclaimers. I also delivered there. And yeah.
Yeah, they sure do. It shocked me because I was like, well, what do you mean? If you're performing this? Okay, yeah, all right. So in the meantime, I did send the pictures to the office manager that I shared with you to just show them, hey, if this is still a concern, even though it's 5 years later,
right,
because this man is still practicing. And if he's already had a complaint for the same problem, then we're probably, you probably need to do some investigating.
right. Yes, absolutely. So Tiffany, you said it's also the system. Yes. And Samaya said the protocols that doctors use are also biased. Yeah. And sometimes, you can get a provider of color who still has some type of bias. And those systems that are set up to cover their behinds. And Tiffany said, do not sign them, ask for time to review it. Yeah.
That's a good one.
That's a good one. But see, again, we don't know what we don't know.
Right.
Because a lot of times when you go into the hospital and you're groggy from whatever's happening, I know whatever they gave me when I first entered into the hospital and they induced me, even though I was already in labor. How you do that, I don't know. But I'm not sure. Like whatever they gave me made me really loopy, and I had no idea what happened for like 3 hours. The first 3 hours of my labor, I do not remember at all. I have no idea.
God.
I can't remember anything. Nothing. So if they came in and asked me to sign paperwork, I don't know what I signed. I have no idea what was happening. I don't know.
Oh my word.
At the same hospital. Like, yeah.
Wow. And here we are, really, the only thing that kind of connected us for a minute was Evangel, right? Or going to the same church. But here we are in 2 different circles and experiences. But this common denominator at this hospital, having these experiences, would say, even just from the 2 of us, would indicate that there is probably a larger problem. If you can't remember the first 3 hours of your birth experience. Wow.
Right. Wow. Yeah. I didn't even know I was in labor until I finally sobered up from whatever that was. And the nurse came in and she said, "Ooh, you've been having some really big contractions. They didn't tell you you were already in labor when you got here?" No. Already in labor, but they still started the induction process. So for them to tell you, "Oh, you're acting like you're in labor,"
which makes me wonder what would have happened if my water hadn't broken. Wow.
Yeah, they might have started the induction process, which, could have led to any number of things. So here we are. And, my birth was in 2009, but, in the 2000s, you wouldn't think that things would be happening this way.
Right.
Why are we still acting like women don't know what they're doing when they come in? If I come to you with a concern, or, as soon as I walk in the door, your first thing shouldn't be, "Hey, you say you're in labor, but probably not." Or, "Hey, you're already in labor. Let's just go ahead and speed up this process so we can get on to whatever it is we need to do." And this is why we're having so many issues with so many different things. Can you imagine what's going on at not only this hospital, but all over the country?
especially when it's in light of the continuous systemic discussion of racism we're having right now in light of things in our country. And I read a nurse making comments that she's in the healthcare system to make sure that niggers don't make it. Blatantly just said that on her page. And I mean, Twitter went crazy. Is this a threat toward all of the Black people in your care? Where do you work? And I mean, yeah. And then I read a story of a poor woman who didn't know she was in labor. She just kept having butt pain. You would think that at a healthcare facility that was an indicator you're probably in labor. No, never said that she was in labor. She didn't know she was in labor. She miscarried at 4 months, and they made her deliver and hold her delivered infant deceased. And the nurse chided her and said, "You should have told us you were in labor. How many years have you been doing this that you don't know I was in labor?" She never had children, so she didn't know that her butt would hurt as a sign of labor.
Right.
And here we are.
Yes, here we are.
That was 2018, I believe.
Wow.
Yeah.
And this nurse that put something on her page indicating that she's in the business.
Well, this is two separate. It's two separate incidents. Yeah. The nurse who made that statement, yeah, that was just yesterday. But the woman whose story I read about, it was a lot of them that had me crying for a couple of hours. That was a couple of years ago that I read that.
Wow. So, and this woman yesterday said she's in the business of making sure that.
And immediately my mind went to, so how many more are there of you who think like this in our healthcare system that are not providing appropriate care for people of color? Mm-hmm. Because once again, my own story, at least half a dozen people checked me in the 3 days I was in that hospital, and not one of them said anything about that bruise on my abdomen, when that's kind of why I'm here. So
right. Yeah. And that makes you question all of these things. Were you one of those people? Were you trying to make sure that I didn't make it? And again, this is why we're looking at providers that are not of color. So if you are caring for women of color and you're being silent on this issue, now we're looking at all of you with a side eye, because what if you're one of those providers where we walk into the hospital okay and don't make it home? Or we go home and we never wake up because of your bias. So, I just really want to thank you for taking the time to share your story. And I'm just thankful that you are still here. Praise God.
I tell you, I have not reflected so hard on my life as just rethinking through the circumstances around having my second son, and that I could not be here. My husband could be figuring it out on his own with two boys, and my daughter wouldn't be here.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
That is crazy. Yes, Tiffany, we definitely need to have a talk about birth options and natural birth, because most of us don't know what our options are. For me personally, I was 24 years old. I had never given birth to a baby before. I didn't know what that was like. I was young. Whatever the doctor told me to do, I was like, okay, this is what I'm doing. But even then, I had done my research. I watched all these documentaries. I knew I wanted to have a midwife and all of these things, and it still didn't go the way I planned. So what happens to the people that don't know anything at all? They just trust whatever the care providers are telling them. Just like when you called and you said, hey, I don't think this is okay.
Right.
And you said, you're fine.
Yeah. Suck it up, buttercup is pretty much what I got.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm so sorry that happened to you. But again, your story is going to help somebody and hopefully they will be able to voice their own concerns and not take no for an answer. So if
Right.
you're out there listening and you have a bruise or something on your abdomen, go to the hospital, go see somebody. If they tell you no, go to another hospital,
Correct.
but don't stop until you are seen.
That's right. That's exactly what I would advise and what I would do now in hindsight and what I did in that second experience. So, amen to that.
Yes. So thank you once again. And you guys, thank you so much for watching. I will be back with more stories next week. And Tiffany, we have to do a talk because people need to know what to do during birth and what their options are. So thanks once again, Catrina. Thank you everybody for watching. Bye-bye, guys.
Thanks. Bye.